particularly like to welcome three people, or one person in particular, who's actually in my screen. I can see her at the bottom of the screen. Someone called Tricia Malloy. Would you like to wave? She's a lady at the bottom of screen one who's she's joined us from Melbourne in Australia at 6:30 in the morning, I hear.
Oh, wow.
And we have people from Canada and Belgium and maybe other far-flung places as well. So
Wonderful.
Welcome to you all. I remember listening to Mark Carney, who was the ex-governor of the Bank of England and also ex-governor of the Bank of Canada, recent BBC Reith lecture, and also, well, currently the special advisor to the UN Secretary General on climate change and finance. And he was saying that the most impressive call he had was a call from the UN Secretary General, which had 15,000 people on a Zoom call. So the stakes have been raised, folks. For our next call, we're going for 15,000. Let me say something about the rules of the game. We'd like you to stay mute if possible, just to ensure the speakers have a clean run. We may need to turn the video off if the system goes a bit shaky. It seems to be all right at the moment. Jeff was wanting to have a system where he had an interactive discussion with people, but that's quite complicated with so many people on the screen. But if people have a desperate urgency to say something, what I suggest is you go into the chat. You all know where the chat is. You hit the chat button and you hit the letter H and then you go enter. And that's what I'm doing to you now, which means my hand is up. I would like to speak. Do you all see that? So if anyone is really desperate, wants to pose a question or for whatever, just you go into the chat, you hit the H, and you send it. And then I'll somehow record the name and try and stop Jeff or whatever. Also, the chat we can use for questions, of course. And I'll try at the end of the session to regroup the questions. I don't know how much time we'll have. Jeff, you said you're very willing to take questions, so let's just see how we go.
Of a polite kind, yeah.
Of a polite kind. I'd also like to welcome Rose Atherton. I don't know how you can make yourself known, Rose. You're in the middle of my screen. I don't know where you are. Can you see her shaking her hand? So Rose Atherton, she's just started an MA in History, Heritage at Lancaster University. She's a very multi-talented and multi-interested girl. I read her CV, and it's the first time I've seen on a CV a qualification for sawing, as in sawing wood. So I don't quite know what that sawing qualification allows her to do, but I'm very pleased to see it. But more interesting in a way, she has many interests: blues, women's blues music in the US, printmaking, painting, pottery, weaving, gardening, vernacular architecture. And she's going to say a few words because she's decided to do some research on Wordsworth and Ullswater for the Friends of the Ullswater Way. And she's going to use the research material she's gathered and put it into our Ullswater Heritage Knowledge Bank, and website, which we are creating at this very moment and hope to launch later on, perhaps in April. It's an ambitious and pioneering and very exciting project, but we hope it'll be filled with heritage stories, videos from the local community, from farmers, miners, artists, writers, poets, fishermen, climbers, fell walkers, conservationists, and even bell ringers. So anything linked to heritage we want to know about, we want to know community stories. And so with that introduction, may I pass the floor to you, Rose? You are going to introduce a little bit of the work you're going to do for a few moments, and then I'll pass the floor to Jeff.
Hello, I'm Rose. Yep, I'm doing my MA at Lancaster, and I'm working with the Heritage Bank as part of a placement And yeah, we're just going to be looking at accumulating all this knowledge we've got about Wordsworth and Ullswater, putting it into the bank, using that as a kind of test run for the bank, and then hopefully making some good kind of forms of knowledge with that. I was hoping, which I'll just say now, to get local people to maybe make some audio files of relevant Wordsworth poetry. So I'll be probably pestering a lot of you at the end, or in emails in the future about that. And just hoping to make a kind of really good interactive resource, maybe looking at creating some Wordsworth walks, or the opportunity to walk around various relevant areas around the lake. And yeah, that's me. And the saw qualification means I can use mechanical saws safely.
Very good. So let me introduce Jeff Cowton. Jeff is the curator and head of learning at the Wordsworth Museum in Grasmere. And he's the person who's led the reinterpretation of Dove Cottage and Museum as part of the major Heritage Fund project, Reimagining Wordsworth. He hopes that Wordsworth Grasmere will be open in April, so do we. And as you know, the collection is mainly focused on William and Dorothy Wordsworth and the wider British Romanticism poets, and the discovery of the Lake District by writers and artists from about 1750 onwards. Jeff, I'm sure, will highlight many of the manuscripts and so on he has in the museum, and he's kindly offered later in the year, if all goes well, to have some Friends of the Ullswater Way visits guided by him or colleagues to the museum. So we'll hear more about that later on. But he's very much interested in an interactive discussion, so it's slightly complicated for him, I think, with this type of format. But as I say, if you wish to make questions, just hit the H and I'll try and interrupt him gently so he can take your questions. Jeff started his work at Dove Cottage as a trainee back in 1981. He became the curator in 1994 and was awarded an MBE in 2010 for his services to museums. So Jeff, with that introduction, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you. And as I say, it was that book that Margaret had, that Ron Sands book, I remember, that gave a very, I guess, approachable introduction to Wordsworth. And that being such an important part of our work is to make Wordsworth approachable. As he said, his own writing, he wished to write poetry that would live and do good. And that drives a lot of our work and a lot of our energies, really. Very nice to meet you, Rose. You're very welcome to, well, when the world allows it, you're very welcome to come to Grasmere. And if you think we can be of any help, please just get in touch. We'd love to help you. We'd love to do that. And welcome to the people from all over the world, particularly Australia. I can't believe it. 6:30 in the morning. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us. I greatly enjoyed looking at the website. I'd love to do part of the trail. The tribute to Clarkson is really very special. So to the Gate to Dorothy. And so we'll be revisiting those points on our ramble this evening. When I mentioned about interactive, it's because I have to admit that my knowledge of the geography of Ullswater isn't as good as it should be. And I can look at pictures of Ullswater, and I sometimes struggle to work out the direction I'm looking, the hills I'm looking at. So I did wonder tonight that towards the end, I've got a little sequence of maybe 20 or 30 watercolors, and I thought I would sort of run through them, maybe 5 or 10 seconds each. I'll give you a number, and if you're able to jot anything down about it, write the number down on a piece of paper, write the note, and if you'd be kind enough to send it to me one way or another, I would be very grateful, because some of the pictures I look at, I do sort of struggle to work out the geography. Or any other comment about anything that would add to our knowledge, as Rose is doing, anything that would add to the knowledge of our collection. It would be great, really good to hear from you. I think at this point, I'm going to try moving to PowerPoint, if I may. Let's see if I can do this. If I can share a screen. This is the moment where it disappears. There it is. Let me share that slideshow. Can you see a picture of Ullswater on your screens? Yeah. So that's one for a start, where I sort of struggle straight away to identify the mountain. So that can be a practice one, if you like. I'm sitting behind me. I'm sitting in the upper rotunda of the Jerwood Centre. Behind me are some of the guidebooks. Conscious of who might be part of this group, I will say it's perhaps the second best collection of Lake District guides and literature in Cumbria. And it does mean that, as you were saying, Tim, that the focus is very much on the Lake District that Wordsworth was growing up and living in, as well as it is the poets' manuscripts and poems and Dorothy's writings too. So if you can see this mouse, I'm just up there at the top of the tower talking to myself, really, in the top of that tower, and you can see Dove Cottage is there at the heart of the matter. The new museum is going to be here. The new cafe will be here. The garden, the woodland will be open to visitors. The visitor site, if you like, and the research centre is all on this side of the road. It's a much more joined up kind of visitor experience when you do come. And then down here is a new dedicated learning space. So it will, we hope, be a much more kind of, dare I say it, sort of joined up experience without having to come back onto the road each time. These are the people, of course, who matter in our lives. William Wordsworth on the left, his sister Dorothy on the right. These are two portraits that come from the Dove Cottage years. So they're both in their mid-30s by this point. William, 29 years old when he came in 1799. Dorothy, a year younger. They stayed for 8 years. It was at Dove Cottage that the poetry that we read, most of it anyway, was created. Of course, it's here that Dorothy's wonderful journals were also written. It's here that William and Mary Hutchinson were married, and it's here where 3 of their 5 children were born. So it's an incredible 8 years in their lives, incredible 8 years for English literature. There it is, there's the house, chimney, garden. And if you haven't yet been to Dove Cottage, but you have, recently, but you have in the distant past, you might have a mental image, a memory of what it looks like. These are some of the images from the cottage as it looks now. We wanted it to become a home. For many years, really, I guess largely unchanged since its opening to the public in 1891. It had been very much like a museum with Wordsworth's belongings in there, catering for groups of 15 people on guided tours. Now you're introduced to the story in a film, and the house is very much like a home. We'd like people to imagine actually real people living as Wordsworth's life was described as plain living and high thinking. And so if you can imagine real people creating this great literature, but at the same time also making their meals and darning their socks, kind of thing. So it's that we want people to feel the life, if you like. And so we move to Ullswater, and in the chronology of Wordsworth's life, you may not believe this, but someone has been to the trouble and created a published book, 2 published books on what Wordsworth did on every day of his life from 1770 to 1815, where it's possible to know. There's a lot of probables and possibles in there, but if you look up the years for Dove Cottage, I think there's a reference to something like 6 or 7 times that they come over to Ullswater. Well, it must have been more than that. I'm sure it must have been more than that. But that's some sort of idea of their coming and goings. This, if you like, these first few pictures are of the Lake District that Wordsworth was growing up in. And as you were saying, Tim, the Lake District was being discovered. Not of course by the people who live here, but by the people who were coming in from the outside, the writers, the artists, the first tourists. And this is a print from the well, actually it isn't. It was first published in the 1750s. This is a reissue some 20 years later. But this is how the people who hadn't been to the Lake District could picture it in this very classical kind of sense. The engraver was from France. You might think that the fishermen in the front, they may look local, they may not look local, it's set up almost as a stage with the activity in the foreground and the mountains in the distance. So that's the 17, well, let's say 1750s. This is I love this drawing. This is by Barrett, George Barrett. It's 1760s. I just love the kind of almost impressionistic side to this. And then this one is from the 1760s too. This is by Lady Mary Lowther. So as we call him, Wicked Jimmy, Sir James Lowther's wife. And this again will be 1760s with a rainbow on the right. And again, I don't know, I'm guessing probably Place Fell somewhere on the left and maybe Hallin Fell on the left. But as I said, my geography is not great, so you won't have to bear with my guesses. I won't do that. But so that's 1760s. And then some of you again will know these, the early maps. So this is by Peter Crosthwaite, the self-styled Admiral of Keswick, who had a museum in Keswick and produced these maps for tourists in the 1780s. So this is 1783, this one. And this really challenged my geography because it's kind of upside down, isn't it? Isn't that right? So we've got Pooley Bridge on the left, and then Glenridding, Patterdale on the right. There's little images. There's Dunmallet there, and then there's Louth's Tower there as well, but sort of very little. And every time these maps were reprinted, republished, they were updated. So if we move forward to 1809, sorry, that's me putting a modern map on the top, just to kind of give a sense of whether it was accurate or not. And it's, I guess it's too difficult. It doesn't perhaps help us very much. But there's the, I guess Hallin Fell is there. So I've just sort of put it somewhere in there. There's the map from 1809. There's a couple of peaks, I think, from Place Fell being added. There's more details about the road that's been added. But this if it's the maps from the 1780s onwards, this is the area Wordsworth was walking to and from school. School at Hawkshead, going back to Penrith with his guardians. And there's details there about the road. There's a wonderful website you may know, which was created by Jean and Martin Norgate, which I think is called Lakes Guides, and it's got many maps, many prints of the Lake District from the late 18th century, and that's where I took the image of this. They're very high quality images, and I think I can't just remember what it's called, but it's Martin and Jean Norgate who put it, and it's Lakes Guides. So if we close in on the bottom left-hand corner, there we have Ewsmere. So this wouldn't have been on the 1783 map. The house by Clarkson built since that, but certainly there by 1809. So there's Thomas Clarkson's. You've also got West Station. So down the bottom left-hand corner, Thomas West, the writer of the first main guidebook to the Lake District, suggested places where you should stand. These were ideally, if you're an artist or come to write your travel journal, he would tell you where to get the best view, and he would tell you down to the last rock and the last tree and the right time of year to come. So you didn't really have to create your own itinerary, but that's one of West Stations at that end of the Pooley Bridge end of Ullswater. And then to the right of that, notice the Duke of Portland's boathouse. And one of the other guidebook writers, William Gilpin, who helped shape the sense of the picturesque, he talks about the Duke of Portland. Duke of Portland, he says, has a vessel on the lake with brass guns for the purpose of exciting echoes. The grandest effect of this kind is produced by a successive discharge of cannon at the interval of a few seconds between each discharge. Such a variety of awful sounds, mixing and co-mixing, and at the same moment heard from all sides, have a wonderful effect on the mind, as if the very foundations of every rock on the lake were giving way, and the whole scene from some strange convulsion were falling into general ruin. So you get a sense that people were coming, seeing the Lake District almost as a kind of plaything. Admiral Crosthwaite would hold regattas on Bassenthwaite Lake, for example, And the terms that were talked about with beauty, horror, and immensity. So the lakes and your visit to the lakes should excite elements and feelings of beauty, horror, and immensity. So I think with the word awful in there, that sense of this sort of grandeur and sublime in there too. So if we think about that is the kind of area Wordsworth was walking to and from, the area that was being discovered, that was becoming popular, the roads improving, and the like. Who were Wordsworth's acquaintances in Ullswater? So that just to run through 2 or 3 people of the people who, if you like, he knew well. And I don't know if anyone recognises that house. That's at Yanworth. I think it was called the Grotto. It's painted by Jacob Thompson in the 1820s, and this is where this man lived. This is Thomas Wilkinson, who was a Quaker. He was active in anti-slave trade campaigning. He's also famous. When I first arrived, somebody said Wordsworth's worst poem was To the Spade of a Friend. I don't know whether it really is Wordsworth's worst poem. I don't know how you judge that. But anyway, I was told almost officially this is his worst poem. And it's To the Spade of a Friend. And it was when he came across Thomas Wilkinson using a spade one day. And so he has the honour of being the subject of Wordsworth's worst poem. So he lived at Yanworth. And other friends at Halsteads. So this is the home of the Marshall family. Dorothy spent 10 days there. I think it was about 1830. And Jane Marshall was Jane Pollard, who Dorothy had a very close relationship from her childhood onwards. And so Dorothy has 3 kind of very close corresponding friends. One's Jane Pollard, one's Catherine Clarkson, who we'll come to, and the other one was Lady Beaumont. And so for a time, well, not for a time because they didn't coincide, but Ullswater, if you like, at different times, has been the home to 2 of Dorothy's very close friends. So that's Watermillock and Halsteads. Another house in the Ullswater area near Ewsmere is Park House, and you can see in the middle here the word Park House. This is where Mary, so William's wife Mary, this is where her brother Thomas lived. They were there from 1803 to 1808, and it was a place that they often visited. At one point, when the whooping cough and the croup, 1806, this is late 1806, was likely to risk the health of Wordsworth's children, the Wordsworth children went to live at Park House for several weeks. And that was, I guess, a kind of isolation of a kind. And so the children were at Park House. Now, in this instance, this is Coleridge's son. This is Hartley Coleridge, who's 10 years old. He's spending time in 1806, also with the Hutchinson family at Park House. And he says here, look, you probably read it already, Park House is a bare, ugly place, but I like it. That is, I like it because friends of mine live here. And so it's a very touching letter from a 10-year-old boy back to his mum. And as I say, his dad just happens to be Samuel Taylor Coleridge. But a lovely letter. Now, my dear mother, I'm well, and I have told you before. And when I come home, I hope will think me a good boy. It's a very touching letter, and lovely writing for a 10-year-old, dare I say. Remember, he's writing with a quill, so all the more admirable maybe for that. Now, I don't know whether if anybody visited our Waterloo exhibition in 1815, you will have seen a copy of this. This is a listing of all the volunteer army groupings, like would you call it militia, I'm not sure, that existed in 1806 to fight off the Napoleonic threat. And there's a section for Westmoreland and a section for Cumberland. And I looked to see if the Patterdale or Wedgwood Loyal Mountaineers were registered on this list, and I couldn't. So they must be there somewhere, but I couldn't see them under Westmoreland or Cumberland. And the reason I put this on is because Captain Luff, he was the leader of the Patterdale or Wedgwood Loyal Mountaineers. So we're talking now about 1805, 1806. And there's another wonderful book that you might know. It's a new book by Simon Bainbridge called Mountaineering and British Romanticism. And he's interested in this term mountaineer, as in the Patterdale Loyal Mountaineers. And he picks a section from Wordsworth's first version of his Guide to the Lake. So his first version was published in 1810 as an introduction to a set of prints. And in that book, in that 1810 book, Wordsworth says, it is not uninteresting to know, I mean, that is so Wordsworth, not uninteresting. You wouldn't say it's interesting. It is not uninteresting to know that in the last house but one of this valley, so we're in Patterdale, separated as it might seem from all the ambition and troubles of the world, from its wars and commotions, was born the youth who, in Spain, took prisoner the colonel of the Imperial Guard of Bonaparte. This favourite of the tyrant fled from the assault of our British mountaineer with his 2 attendants, who escaped, but he himself was not so fortunate. So that might be a story well known in Ullswater and Patterdale, but I thought it was very interesting use of this term mountaineer, not as somebody that we might think who scales Everest, but as someone who lives amongst the mountains. So that's Captain Luff. Now, Mrs. Letitia and Charles Luff lived at Side, I think it became Side Farm, an estate there near Goldbrook Beck. And in 1812, they moved to Mauritius, but Captain Luff died in 1815. So Letitia came back to live in the Lake District. For a time, she lived in Dove Cottage, and there is Letitia Luff, and she lived from when did she live? She lived a good age. She lived into her 70s, so she's in her 70s then. Well, there's her age, 1775 to 1871. She lived 96. I do beg your pardon, but there she is, and that's a stereoscopic card, which, if you're not familiar with, is almost the identical picture, but just slightly different, so that when you look at it through a viewer, she appears in 3D. But that's Letitia Luff. So that was another of the connections with Ullswater. So we've got Wilkinson. So far we've got Park House. We've got the Luffs. Should also mention, of course, the Clarksons. I don't have an image to go with that, but Thomas Clarkson, who built Ewsmere, 1794, I think, married Catherine Buck. Left again in 1804, but a great friendship for the Wordsworths, Catherine in particular with Dorothy. And it was on their visits to and from the Clarksons that Wordsworth saw the daffodils. Interestingly, when Wordsworth and Coleridge did their walk in 1799 together, in which they came across Dove Cottage and where Wordsworth decided to settle, they also called on Clarkson. And a letter that Catherine wrote to Priscilla Lloyd in 1799. I must tell you that we had a visit from Coleridge and W. Wordsworth, who spent a whole day with us. Coleridge was in high spirits and talked a great deal. Well, again, that wouldn't surprise some of us. Wordsworth was more reserved, but there was neither hauteur nor moroseness in his reserve. He was a fine, commanding figure, is rather handsome, and looks as if he was born to be a great prince or a great general. He seems very fond of Coleridge, laughing at all his jokes, taking all opportunities of showing him off, and to crown all he has, the manners of a gentleman. So that's a lovely description, and that comes from a visit to Ewsmere. There's also another account we've got. We've got a number of people's private diaries, private accounts coming to the Lake District. And one of them was Hannah Gurney, who was again a Quaker. So there's clearly this Quaker connection with Wilkinson, with Clarkson, with Hannah Gurney. I think she was part of the Barclays family, but she visits and she says she's really very taken with Ullswater. I think Ullswater becomes her favourite lake because of the effects of the light on the water. So we're now looking, obviously, we're looking there from the top of Cowton Pass, looking down towards, I guess, Brothers Water, I guess, and Ullswater. And I just thought it might be interesting to look at a couple of excursions to these friends. So some of you, again, I'm sure will know this, but Thomas de Quincey writes an account of his visit to Ullswater with the Wordsworths. And he's going over the struggle, which we do. I'd heard of no horses and took it for granted that we were to walk. This is De Quincey writing in his recollections of his visits to the lakes and his time with the lakes poets. I'd heard of no horses and took it for granted that we were to walk. However, at the moment of starting, a cart, the common farmer's cart of the country, made its appearance, and the driver was a bonny young woman of the Vale. Such a vehicle I had never in my life seen used for such a purpose. But what was good enough for the Wordsworths was good enough for me. And accordingly, we were all carted along to the little town or large village of Ambleside. From Ambleside, and without 1 foot of intervening ground, flat ground, begins to rise the famous ascent of Kirkstone, after which for 3 long miles all riding in a cart drawn by 1 horse becomes impossible. The ascent is, in some parts, almost frightfully steep. The road, being only the original mountain track of shepherds, gradually widened and improved from age to age, especially since the era of tourists began, is carried over ground which no engineer, even in alpine countries, would have viewed as practical. The innkeeper of Ambleside or Lowood will not mount this formidable hill without 4 horses. So that gives you some sense. And I think he also talks about the scariness of coming down, as well as the difficulty of going up. And Dorothy Wordsworth talked about another occasion on the return where they come by Grisdale Tarn. And there's Grisdale Tarn. That's drawn by I mentioned Thomas Hutchinson, who lived at Park House, Mary's brother. Well, that's his daughter Sarah who did that drawing of Grisdale Tarn. I think in the 1850s, I think it was. And one of these stories of them coming back, Dorothy says, I mean, this is in the dark. I mean, this is the thing to think about. They travelled these roads in the dark. We struggled with the wind and often rested as we went along. A hail shower met us before we reached the tarn, and the way often was difficult over the snow. But at the tarn, the view closed in. We saw nothing but mists and snow, and at first the ice on the tarn below us cracked and split, yet without water, a dull grey-white. We lost our path and could see the tarn no longer. We made our way out with difficulty, guided by a heap of stones, which we well remembered. We were afraid of being bewildered in the mists till the darkness should overtake us. But we were long before we knew that we were on the right track, but thanks to William's skill, we knew it long before we could see our way before us. There was no footmark upon the snow, either of man or beast. We saw 4 sheep before we had left the snow region. And then Dorothy says about getting back, but we had both of us been much heated upon the mountains, but we caught no cold. Oh, comfortable and happy we felt ourselves sitting by our own fire. And that's a lovely thought, that they made it back to Dove Cottage and were sat by their fire. And so many of Dorothy's accounts end with the comfort of the home and the fire. Now, in 1805, they undertook a longer venture, and it was November. And after the event, Dorothy wrote an account of several days of going to Ullswater. This account was written for their personal use. A copy was made, so Dorothy wrote the whole thing out again and gave a copy to Lady Beaumont, and that's now in the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York. We've got a version of it here, and what's particularly interesting about it is that Wordsworth takes Dorothy's account of the Ullswater excursion and he publishes it in his own guide, and every reader who read it would imagine this was Wordsworth's writing. And in fact, it becomes a joint piece of writing, largely Dorothy, but to which William adds pieces and makes it sound like his own. It's not. I wouldn't suggest for a moment that he's, if you like, stealing Dorothy's work and trying to pass it off for his own. It's just a joint piece of writing that began as Dorothy's. And what I'm going to try to do is to show you this on a camera. So I just have to do that, and then I hope to see if that'll work. Okay, so if I turn this round, so Dorothy describes the route. They stayed with the Lupps that we've already been introduced to, stayed with the Hutchinsons at Park House. They see fishing, they see people fishing, and Dorothy talks about there being, I don't know if she gives a number to them, but there seems to be plentiful fish that's being caught. They have one, I think, for their supper that evening. They visit the remains of an old chapel at Boredale, and this moment makes its way into Wordsworth's epic poem, The Excursion. They visit a hunting lodge, and while they're at Patterdale, they learn of the news of the death of Nelson, and the victory at Trafalgar. And Wordsworth is distressed at the death of Nelson, and is also a bit disbelieving in a way of it. And is as concerned about the death of Nelson as he is as the Battle of Trafalgar. And this in time becomes the inspiration for another of his poems, The Character of the Happy Warrior. Now, this is on here. This is the, you can see this has been a manuscript that's been conserved. In the 1970s onwards, we undertook a major program of conservation. So this is a beautiful marble paper by Sandy Cockrell, who did maybe 20-30 years, the bulk of our conservation. And what he's done is he's given a very firm structure to what had been a notebook of Dorothy. So this is a notebook of Dorothy. You might be able to see that it says Dorothy Wordsworth just on there. And it's a kind of a cartridge paper that covers it. And it's a series of little homemade booklets, sort of sections, folded sections, stitched together, as you can see. And it's a wonderful manuscript, this, because it includes a number of Dorothy's writings, including The Excursion of Scarfell Pike, and includes some of her poems. And here you can see, I hope you can see, it says November 1805, and it's a William and Mary returned from Park House by the Patterdale Road on Saturday, November the 4th, with Mr. and Mrs. Clarkson. Having made a delightful excursion, it's possible to read that, having made a delightful excursion of 3 days. And this account is the account of those days at Ullswater. And it's a fair copy. The chances are this may have existed in another form before it was written here. You can see that there's odd revisions that Dorothy has made, but you can also see perhaps pencil lines like that. And these, I think, are all to do with this moment, whenever it was 17 years later, when William and Dorothy sat down together and thought, how can we make this private diary into something that can go in a guidebook to the Lake District? So as you're looking at this, as I turn the pages, you can imagine Dorothy writing it out first as a private diary, and then she and William turning it into something that could be published. And it's interesting to read it in the light of what we just read about returning home and sitting by the fire, because at the end of the journal, you might just possibly see in pencil, it says, reached home by midnight. So that sense of closure, that sense of, if you like, a happy ending, if you like, to this tale. This one is so much nicer than the published one because it's wonderfully personal. And there's a piece in the published guide where William talks about how did Brothers Water get its name. Well, in the manuscript version that didn't make it into the published, there's a much fuller explanation of the story of the two brothers who drowned, she tells us. But it's lovely here because, again, I'm not sure if it's possibly in focus or whether it's readable, but you know, we went to, is that Mr. Jones's shop maybe, and called upon Miss Monkhouse and Mrs. Coupland's. Mary Monkhouse and Sarah mounted at the George. I walked with William through the town to Mr. Elwood's door. The first time I had been in Penrith streets at that time of the night since Mary and her sister Margaret and I used to steal out to each other's houses, and when we had had our talk over the kitchen fire. I mean, that's so wonderfully personal, and a sense of Dorothy in her childhood in Penrith, or her younger days, if not her childhood, sort of sneaking out and sort of slightly mischievous. So it's a lovely thing, and you can see again, you know, the changes that they've been working on. It's a Rose, if you get the chance to come across, you must come and have a look at this. Some of these things clearly we're never to read again. I mean, that's not just a change that says I want to change one word to another. There's something obviously very interesting in there that somebody at some point hasn't wanted us to read. There we go. And again, perhaps you can read that. A beautiful morning, when we were at breakfast, so this is Patterdale, heard the tidings of Lord Nelson's death and the victory at Trafalgar, went to the inn to make further inquiries. I was shocked to hear that there had been great rejoicings at Penrith, returned by Williams, Rock and Grove, and was so much pleased with the spot that he determined to buy it. So that's another story that comes from this, which we'll come to in just a moment. So this is what it becomes. So this is obviously a greenback version copy of Wordsworth. This is 1823, and this is how it turned out. So people reading this in 1823 would have no idea that what they were really basing it on was this wonderful manuscript that we've got in front of us here. And as we saw, it was penciled in at the end. See if I can just get to the end of the chapter. There we are. So the bit that we saw penciled in at the end makes it into print, reached home a little before midnight. And again, you know, imagine coming over Kirkstone, this is November, coming over Kirkstone Pass in the dark and getting home just by midnight, you know? But begs also the question, how on earth did they see their way? There we go. Behind us, when we had climbed to a great height, we saw one light, very distant in the vale, like a large red star, a solitary one in the gloomy region. The cheerfulness of the scene was in the sky above us. So that's a lovely thing. So I'll just, bear with me, just go back to the other for a moment. So there's the tour, which we don't need to dwell on. But if you're interested in more on this, the journal that's in the Pierpont Morgan Library, that's available to read as a transcript and see the image. So you can read the version that Lady Beaumont had. But on the there's something called the Romantic Circles website, and they're doing really interesting work. They're doing Dorothy Wordsworth's Guide to the Lake District. So they're extracting Dorothy's writing about the Lake District, almost like a parallel guide to the lakes. And they've done work on this manuscript as well. And part of that, they've created this map. So you can see there really the journey that they took, which was pretty comprehensive. Now, it was mentioned there that William decided to buy a piece of land. And this, again, some of you, I'm sure, know the story of this. I'm sure you know it better than I do. But essentially, having seen that bit of land and it being in a part of the world where their brother John was particularly fond. Now, their brother John, William and Dorothy's brother, he too was a mariner, and he had died earlier in that same year. He died in February 1805. Here's Nelson dying, is it October, I think it is, Trafalgar. So it really resonated with Wordsworth. And so being in a place that John was very fond of, hearing the news of another seaman dying, he felt that he wished to buy this piece of land. And he decided that he would go through Wilkinson, his friend at Yanworth. So he went to his friend Wilkinson, and he said, "This is £800. I'm authorizing you to buy this house." And so it was left at that, £800, Wordsworth felt. Nothing came of it until August of the following year, August 1806. And Wilkinson got in touch with Wordsworth and said that he'd agreed £1,000. The deal was done, £1,000 for this house. And Wordsworth kind of writes to a friend, well, probably Wilkinson's expecting a letter of thanks from me for this, but actually it's caused me a bit of a problem. One thing is, if I thought it was only worth £800, why am I paying £1,000, even if I'm not paying for the money? And secondly, Wilkinson has gone to Lowther, and Lowther has said, "I'll stump up the other £200. So Wordsworth had overpaid for something that he thought wasn't worth £1,000, and now he was in debt of gratitude to Lowther for paying this money. So what could he do? Does he go back on both? Well, he decided not to, and he decided to gracefully accept it. And he decided that as a family with Wilkinson, they would go and meet Lowther. When they went, he wasn't there, but it did, of course, mean that friendship did come from this, and in the end, I guess, led to Wordsworth becoming distributor of stamps in 1813. So that moment, if you like, Wilkinson's intervention, well-meaning, did lead to this friendship. Now, I understand, I'm sure if you live there, you'll know far better than I do, that Wordsworth had planned to build a house, or at least extend an existing farmhouse. But I think, am I right in saying that didn't happen? And he sold it in 1834. So I think that's the story of that. It was Broad Howe. And is that right, that that's now become known as Wordsworth Cottage? Somebody can maybe help me out with this. Now, also, when they were at Patterdale on this November visit and they stayed at the inn, Wordsworth thought it would be a good idea for Sir Walter Scott, well, he wasn't Sir at the point, but Walter Scott, who he'd met in 1803, to visit the Lake District. So from the Patterdale Inn, he wrote to Walter Scott and said, "Come to the Lake District." So from that moment, again, there's a lot come out of this November 1805 moment. From that moment, Walter Scott visited the following year, and they stayed at the Patterdale Inn. And you may know this story too, but it's a very wonderful story. Where are we? Where can I find my story about Walter Scott? Anyway, if I can't find it in my... Oh, here we go. So they were going to stay at the Patterdale Inn and go up Helvellyn. There were no beds available in the inn, but the innkeeper gave them permission to sleep on the floor of the sitting room after all the guests had retired. Some of the ladies, however, were determined to talk into the very late hours. Wordsworth and Scott did their best to move them. Pretending to be watchmen, they walked back and forth under the windows outside the room, calling out the half hours. The ardent conversationalists ignored the calls and did not so much as look at the supposed watchman. One of these ladies was on her way to Scotland in the hopes of being introduced to the famous poet Walter Scott. that's kind of priceless. Wordsworth and Scott did eventually get to sleep on the floor, although later than they'd intended, and took their memorable walk up Helvellyn the next day. And if you remember visiting Dove Cottage and seeing a dog in the first room called Pepper, the story always was that Walter Scott brought Pepper as a gift to the Wordsworths on that time that they climbed Helvellyn. We have found no proof of that at all. But there's Helvellyn, and that's, if you may recognize that picture, John Constable taking that picture And the brown inky bit in the middle says Helvellyn in Cumberland, coming through from the other side. Thinking on the poetry, one of Wordsworth's poems of Ullswater, as again I'm sure you know, is The Somnambulist. It's on the trail, I see, and I just thought you might like to see one or two pictures of Air Force. This one is by Thomas Chubbard. It's a sketch which becomes that picture there. The two engravings, alum from the 1830s in the middle, and then on the right is Emily Genevieve Smith. And on the left here is Catherine Ann Bottomley, and this is a drawing in a sketchbook. And I think I'm right in saying Wordsworth, either he didn't give it to her, or it certainly got his signature in it, where he'd met her, Catherine Ann Bottomley, later Hood. And on the right is Thomas Creswick, which we've got dated as somewhere sort of 1847 or after. And then Love's Tower. This is interesting. It maybe doesn't look so much of a drawing, but in the year that Wordsworth died, someone who clearly knew the family well did an album of sketches, compiled an album of sketches of places linked to Wordsworth's poetry and Wordsworth's life, and this is one of them. What's interesting, particularly helpful, is the artist has written things. Maybe you can see like the words like ivy there, for example. And he also did drawings of Wordsworth of Dove Cottage at Grasmere, and he's put all sorts of interesting details like that. So they're almost like historical records as much as they are works of art, if you like. So the next poem I thought we might look at is so just to sort of give an outline of where we might be going, is I thought we might look at this poem. I thought we might look at a certain moment that involves a certain flower at Ullswater next, and then I thought we might just look at a few pictures and then see where we get to with that. So if you can bear with me just a little longer. This is by Walmsley, a Dublin-born artist. It was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1792, and again, I just couldn't begin to think about the topography in the picture. One of the key things, I suppose, is it has a little boat in it. And the next picture, similarly, this is Joseph Wright of Derby, 1795. This also has a little boat in it, and so you probably guessed where we're going in this. Again, this is a picture I would really love to know the hills that we're looking at there. What are we looking at in this picture? So going back to the Wordsworth childhood, going from Hawkshead, going to Penrith. Again, many of you will know the episode where Wordsworth comes across a boat, a little skiff as he calls it, and he rows out into the lake. And as he rows out, the mountain in the distance uprears above the closest mountain, and it creates this tremendous impact on Wordsworth's mind and imagination. And in a very agitated state, he turns the boat and he rows back. And as he says, it was a trouble to his thoughts for much time to come. Now, that episode was written when Wordsworth was in Germany. So I'm just going to stop sharing and go back to the other camera. There we go. And if we could imagine, if it's possible to imagine, William and Coleridge had just published the Lyrical Ballads. Wordsworth in particular was in need of an income, and he thought one source of an income was to become a translator. And so William, Dorothy, Coleridge in their late 20s go off to Germany, and William and Dorothy end up in a small German town called Goslar, and it is so cold that they can barely go out. If they go from one room to another, we're told that they had to put extra clothing on. So brother and sister, barely speaking the language, barely able to go out. They wanted to learn the language, and the person they were with, I think, was both deaf and had very few teeth. So the communication was difficult. Brother and sister, that raised suspicions as well. What did that really? Were they really brother and sister, if you like? And so Wordsworth, he's short of books to read, and he's got an overactive mind. And Coleridge has said to him, you, Wordsworth, are to become the great poet of the age. You're going to write the epic as Milton wrote the epic. And I'll have a plan for you, but you will be the poet, the greatest poet. Well, coming from Coleridge, that must have been pretty good, and also pretty daunting. And so Wordsworth, that holed up in this place in Germany, starts to think, well, how did it come to this? How have I got to this point where, you know, this weight is on me? How have I become this poet? And so he starts to think of his childhood and his education, and he asks the question, was it for this? Was it for this moment? You know, has my life so far been for this moment to become this great poet? But it also has another side to it. Was it for this? Has it all been in vain? What happens if I can't do it? You know, has it been in vain, or has it been for this purpose? And he thinks about his natural education, and so he thinks about his boyhood incidents. And one of these incidents is he thinks about this rowing moment in Ullswater. And he picks up this little notebook, and it's a German notebook. They actually bought 4 of these little notebooks. I know it's a little bit worn, but given it's 200 years old and it's been in a lot of bags and a lot of houses and all sorts of things before it came to the library, I think it's lasted remarkably well. And in the front of the notebook, Dorothy has written about some of the conversations they've been having. So they met a German writer, Klopstock, and so Dorothy writes there, Mr. Klopstock took us to see his brother, the poet. So there is Dorothy writing about people they met in Germany. But at the back of the book, Wordsworth starts writing poetry about his boyhood. And one of the things he writes about is this episode on Ullswater. And this is a fairly neat copy. So imagine him sitting in this cold flat, this cold apartment rather, in Germany. And if we start, I'll just read a few lines. So we start where my finger is the moon. I hope is that reasonably focused? Is that readable? Yeah. So the moon was up. The lake was shining clear among the hoary mountains. From the shore I pushed, struck the oars, and struck again in cadence. And my little boat moved on, just like a man who walks with stately step, though bent on speed. A rocky steep uprose above the cabin of the willow tree, and as he seemed a man who proudly rode with his best speed, I fixed a steady view upon the top of the same shaggy ridge, the bound of the horizon, but behind was nothing, the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Where are we? Where have I lost myself here? I lost myself where I was reading. There we go. She was an elfin pinnace. 20 times I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and I rose upon it at the stroke. My boat went heaving through the water like a swan. So there we are. Heaving through the water like a swan. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. And so that's when he goes on to talk about the troubled to his dreams. But there's the beginnings of the memory of that episode on Ullswater when he was a boy on the boat. And he has a couple of goes at it. So if you look there, these are the same lines. This is the what we call the boat stealing as well. So even in these few pages here, he has a couple of attempts to get the poem right. And it's here that we get also in the same notebook the famous question, was it for this that one, the fairest of all rivers, loved to blend his murmurs with my nurse's song? So it's a kind of very wonderful moment. And you know, we say, well, you know, what is the value of manuscript? Well, the value is, yeah, you've got the text and you've got the poem, but you're also almost looking over the shoulder of William and Dorothy. Imagine them sitting together and writing this. And then, having written it, of course, they want Coleridge to know all about it. This is what I've been doing, Coleridge. You know, I've not been wasting my time. So they write Coleridge a letter, and Dorothy writes the letter because William says that holding a pen gives him a pain in his side and in his chest. And so Dorothy writes this letter. William goes for a walk, and when he's out, she picks up this huge sheet of paper and she starts writing out poems so that Coleridge can read what William's been doing. And look what we've got down here. Because everybody knows what we've got down here. The stolen boat. One evening I went into a shepherd's boat, a skiff which to a willow tree was tied within a rocky cove, or some might say rocky cave, within a rocky cave, its usual home. The moon was up, the lake was shining clear among the hoary mountains. So again, can we picture this scene that you know, Dorothy's got this notebook, you know, on the table next to her, and she's writing this out. And can we just imagine what Coleridge made of it? You know, Coleridge is missing them. You know, he says to them, you know, you and William and Dorothy, you are all in each other. I am alone. He's missing them. He's in another part of Germany. And so can you imagine what it must have been like for Coleridge to open this great letter and to see what his great friend William and Dorothy have been up to. Now, that's kind of all very well, and that makes this notebook really quite amazing. But some of you might also have noticed when I was holding it, I don't know if it's readable, but it also says diaries, because at some point later in its life, somebody's written the word diaries on, and there's a clue, because this notebook was picked up in England 4 years later by Dorothy looking for somewhere to write a journal. So at the back, you've got the beginnings of what we now know as the prelude. Those lines at the back all become the prelude. But Dorothy picks up the same notebook and writes about life in Grosvenor, which is very inconvenient for a curator because you've got two of the best works of English literature in the same book. So how do you display them both? Well, there isn't an answer. You can't. But if I open this up and I read some of this, I'm going to start just there, see if it's possible to follow. When we were in the woods beyond Gowbarrow Park, we saw a few daffodils close to the waterside. We fancied that the lake had floated the seeds ashore and that the little colony had so sprung up. But as we went along, there were more and yet more. And at last, under the boughs of the trees, we saw there was a long belt of them along the shore, about the breadth of a country turnpike road. I never saw daffodils so beautiful. They grew among the mossy stones about and about them. Some rested their heads upon these stones as on a pillow of weariness, and the rest tossed and reeled and danced, and seemed as if they verily laughed with the wind. They looked so gay, ever glancing, ever changing. So in that one notebook, you've got the beginnings of what we now think of as one of the greatest poems in English literature, the prelude, And in the middle, you've got that shared moment of William and Dorothy walking by the shores of Ullswater, seeing the daffodils, which 2 years later William returned to and wrote the poem, of course, that, as I think was once voted the best loved poem in English literature. Now, of course, it's that classic thing that a poem is not a real event by any means. And what we've also got is a letter from the same date that of the journal. And the poem, of course, I Wandered Lonely, I think there's a gentle breeze mentioned in the poem. We left Usmere. This is Dorothy's account in a letter. So we've had the journal account. We know the poem says about a breeze. Mrs. Clarkson was very well, set off with us intending to go to Watermillock, but she got no further than the lane at the foot of Dunmallet, for she durst not face the furious wind that blew against us. Indeed, we could hardly stand it. If we'd been going from home, we certainly should have turned back, but we pushed on boldly. So it just goes on. It sometimes almost took our breath away. We rested whenever we found a shelter and reached Stuybarrow Crag about sunset. So that sense of wandering, lonely as a cloud and gentle breeze, well, the real event, as it were, if you can call it that, not that it matters, was of a furious gale rather than a gentle breeze. So very quickly, I just very quickly run through some pictures. So I'm just going to run through them really quickly, and I'm going to mention a number next to each one. And if you feel you've got anything to say, any comment, if you would be kind enough to make a note of the number, and then let me know if you would. So this is Robert Sherborne, Ullswater, 1781. So this is just a sit back and enjoy for 5 minutes, lots of pictures, no hard work required, just sort of a wind down, as it were. That's number 2. So that's Thomas Sunderland, View at the Head of Ullswater. I don't know the date for that, maybe 1780s. View at the Head of Ullswater, Thomas Sunderland. Number 3 is Ferdinand Becker, Ullswater. Again, we've got a possible date of maybe 1790 for that. If anyone might have a suggestion where that might be, that's number 3. That's number 4. So that's John Warwick Smith, the commission for the Kirwan family, and Patterdale Hall. So that's circa 1790. And that's John Warwick Smith again, same date, what we just know as Ullswater. So again, any thought as to what we might be looking at? That looks like a crag that might uprear its head, that Wordsworth might have seen while rowing a boat almost. So that's John Warwick Smith. That's the Reverend Thomas Gisborne, Ullswater from Gobarrow Park we've got down, and that's 1796. Some of these attributions we can't be 100% sure. These are the things that we were when we acquired them. If we haven't discovered anything since, that's kind of what we've gone by. So that's Thomas Gisborne. That is number 7. So that's Thomas Chubbard, Stuybarrow Crag. Thomas Chubbard, Stuybarrow Crag, number 7. And then Sir George Beaumont, 1798. That's James Bourne, Ullswater. Again, around about 1800. This is part of a printed book. It's a really remarkable thing. It's got a letterpress. I think I'm right in saying there's only 3, maybe 4, 3 surviving copies, and it's got original watercolors that go with the letterpress. So that's number 9. Number 10 is Robert Seaton, Ullswater, 1805. And number 11 is taken from an album And this is Mason Chamberlain, Lake of Ullswater, Goborough Park, 1806. Number 12 is Francis Nicholson, Head of Ullswater, circa 1807. Number 13 is Elizabeth Wharton, and this is dated 15th of August, 1811. This is Artist Unknown. I really like this one. This is 1812, 4th of September, 1812. 14th of September, 1812. This is number 15. This is Thomas Allen, known for his steel engravings in the 1830s, particular of the Lake District views. You might know that one. That's 1835. Turner came in 1797, and I think I'm right in saying it's from a sketch that he made on his tour of that time that he later created this for a book of prints. That's pretty good too. That's Edward Lear. That's dated 1837. He did a tour of the lakes in 1836. This is Mary Ellen Bush. I mean, I'd be really interested if anybody knows which garden this is taken from. That would be particularly helpful. Looks like the church, doesn't it, to the left? Whether that might help at all. That's 1847. This is number 19. This is Ferdinand Becker, Ullswater. Well, you can see Ullswater from Goborough Park. Number 20 is William Green, Ullswater. Number 21 is Joseph Wilkinson. This is a preparatory drawing for that first book of prints that Wordsworth wrote the introduction to that became his guide. And interesting that Wilkinson did the main drawing, but you can see the figures in the margins. Someone else did the figures for these prints. And so when the engraver or the etcher came together, he would merge the figures in the margins with Wilkinson's drawing as the main body of it. Thomas Sunderland, we got this down as Erin Crag with the Reverend H. Askew's house under the boats on Ullswater. This is number 23, Carolyn Morland, Mr. Askew's in Patterdale, done by Caroline when a little girl. And then Ullswater, Mr. Askew's. And this one is number 25. This is William Turner of Ullswater. And then a lovely one there. This is Harriet Carr, afterwards Cheney, upper part of Ullswater from Louth's Tower. And then just two more, which really intrigued me, these two. These are 1872. The artist is CHL, which has clearly got a steamer on the lake. Ullswater Hotel, Patterdale, 1872. And similarly, Ullswater taken from a boat. And then the very final one, which is that. Now, we've been very careful in not sharing pictures of the new museum before it's opened, but there is a glimpse. I think this is the first picture of the new museum that certainly I've shared outside of work, as it were. But I thought you might like to see that Ullswater is the huge image that every visitor will see when they come into Gallery 1. And in the showcase that you can't see there, that hasn't yet got its object in it, will be I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud and Dorothy's Journal that we've just been looking at. So I think I can officially say that looking at Dorothy's Journal as we've just done there and looked through the pages, I'm going to say that's probably the last time that will happen for a long time, because as of February, it will go in that showcase and it will be much more difficult to actually look through. So that's been a very special thought, that this, as I say, might be the last time that we can share it in a kind of workshopy kind of moment like that. So I'm just going to end by saying thank you. If anybody's still out there, thank you. It's very strange sitting in a room talking to yourself, hoping that at least some of the 85 people might still be there. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this. Thank you, Tim, for organising it, and Anne for organising it tonight. As I say, thank you for those who are still there. Please come and see us as a group or individually when we open. Collaborations are good. The Duddon Valley collaboration has been really rewarding. It's Dorothy Wordsworth's 250th birthday. There might be collaborations between your valley and here. That's something to think about. But other than that, I look forward to seeing you as real people, as it were, when the situation allows. So at that point, I shall stop sharing. And thank you again.
And can you unmute everyone so that everyone can clap?
Thank you.
I'm not sure I can. I think you can unmute yourselves.
Wow.
Thank you, Jeff.
You, Trish, for staying away.
Wow, Jeff, you've done just completely masterful work. I mean, poor old Rose, what a lot of work she's going to do to summarize all that in a little single entry for Ullswater. What a masterpiece. And I have so many things I would like to say, but what would people like to do? I've got Mark Richards who wanted to put in an urgent question. How long do you have still with us, Jeff?
Well, I'm all right. I hope I haven't tested your stamina so far. I'm sorry, I've realised I've gone past the hour. But
let's go on till 9. For those people who wish to go on till 9, let's. Mark, would you like to have a word?
Mark, yes. Oh, yes, I was going to say, most of the pictures, I can put an explanation as to what you're looking at, as I'm sure many will. Like 26, which focuses in on Dollywag and Pike, for example, which otherwise you wouldn't identify. But lots of them I could help Jeff with, because it's knowing the geography that enables you to guess, because every artist puts their own expression in, and of course you don't necessarily get strict geography and topography reflected. But certainly I can help you, Jeff.
Thank you. I mean, what I could do, Mark, is I've got this as a PDF file, the pictures I showed. I could put it in an email to you.
Please do.
If there was any comments you wanted to make, that would be wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
That's fine. Yeah, we'll do it through. You can do it through Tim or Anne. Yeah,
we'll do. I think I saw somebody ask about the book I held up. Is that right? The
in West, yeah.
So that's the. Can you see that? All right. So it's called Mountaineering and British Romanticism: The Literary Cultures of Climbing, 1770 to 1836, and it's Simon Bainbridge. Simon Bainbridge, a brand new book. And we're thinking of having a Wordsworth Trust webinar just on that very book. It's really a fantastic book.
Jeff, do you know Janet and Annan Wedgwood, who are on the call? Because you were talking about the Patterdale Militia, and we were honoured to have a whole a presentation by Janet Widgeon on the Patterdale Militia. Do you know each other?
Mountaineering.
Hi.
Books, it'll be.
Yes, I was wondering if you knew about Wordsworth's visit to Luff's Tower and Galborough to see the manoeuvres of the militia in July 1804, I think. And Luff writes about it to Tom Wedgwood afterwards. He said, "We had a beautiful day, and one which I would not have foregone for scarcely any consideration. I have pursued your plans." This is Tom Wedgwood's plans. They discussed the manoeuvres. "I pursued your plans for our campaign and the manner of its execution. The ground was particularly formidable to the movement of the light troops, being Galborough Park. A very severe day it was," etc., etc. "William Wordsworth dined with us on the lawn before the house, and declared it to be the most interesting day he had ever witnessed, and such a one as he would long remember.
That's fantastic. Well, that's just fantastic. What was the date of that, please, Janet?
I think it was, yes, Luff describes the date to him, 21st of May, 1804. Yes,
Fantastic.
Tom was hoping to be there, but was ill.
I'm going to look up the chronology of Wordsworth's life and see if it's in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim?
Yes, David. Yes.
Sorry, it's Alan Wedgwood.
Alan, sorry, beg your pardon.
That when Jan gave that talk, you remember a guy turned up with a musket, and we've never found him again.
Oh.
Latterdale.
Yes, it was actually remarkable, Jeff. Janet gave this really inspirational talk about the Patterdale militia, and a guy from Glenridding turned up to listen with a massive, great musket, and it took place in Park and Memorial Hall in Pooley Bridge. And yes, sadly, he hasn't shown up again, but a good time was had by all. He happened to have a special expertise in the subject of muskets.
Well, when we did the Waterloo exhibition in 2015, a friend with a capital F of the Trust got in touch and said, "Would we like to borrow some weaponry?" And so I better not say where it was, but it was in a Cumbrian village and a very, if I may say, ordinary looking flat bungalow. And it was like an arsenal inside, you know, there was like bayonets and guns and all sorts of things. So you just don't know what goes on in people's houses, really.
I was very interested, Jeff, by when you talked about West Station, the points around the lake. You're probably aware that when the Friends of the Ullswater Way produced the Heritage Trail around the lake, we have special markings. Anne will explain in more detail, maybe if she wants, which actually situate you exactly at the point where, say, for example, Turner did a painting of the lake and so on. It allows you to do that and the Ullswater steamers, we've just been told in the last few days, are going to produce a new app. And we're hoping to put into that app, the actual physical locations of many of the sites around. So it's a modern version of what West did in, I don't know what the time was that he did that.
Well, 1778, the first time. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic.
There's lots of comments, Jeff. I don't know how to deal with them. There's obviously a massive amount of information and exchange that can happen.
Oh, there's the thing about this.
How we can gather all this information, because I think there's so much expertise on this call.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, I'll save the chat, if I may, and extract some of that information. That thing about the paddle steamers is fantastic.
We've already got the name of the musket man. It was called Mike Bishop, according to Jill from Barton Parish Council. There we are.
Yes, I have got it somewhere.
Does anyone have any other questions? Maybe they've also asked that people asking for your email address. I don't know whether you're
willing to put that in there. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. Try that.
But maybe, I don't know, after when Rose starts her exercise of trying to gather information about Ullswater, maybe those people who are interested in that exercise, and it's being piloted by Lancaster University, and the person who's piloting it on this call as well, someone called Chris Donaldson. Yeah, maybe we can use this wonderful Zoom call to gather all this information. I was thinking actually Mark Richards he would be interested by the map, because I'm hearing that he's interested in doing a map of Ullswater for walkers, and obviously there's a very rich source of material going back centuries, literally.
Well, that Lakes Guide website, that Martin Norgate, Jean Norgate website, that it's not comprehensive, but it's pretty fantastic. And there's so many maps of the Lake District, so many prints of the Lake District, guidebooks are in there. It's a fantastic thing. And the other thing I mentioned was Romantic Circles, which is an American romanticist website, but it's got Dorothy Wordsworth's if you like, a constructed Dorothy Wordsworth's Guide to the Lakes, which to sort of something else to look forward to is that there are a number of Dorothy Wordsworth's journals that have never been published. They're not Grasmere ones, they're Rydal Mount ones from the 1820s, 1830s. And this Romantic Circles, Dorothy's Lakes Guide, as it were, is going to include transcripts of a couple of those. So for the first time, you'll be able to read Dorothy's lake journals, or two of them anyway, as well as the Grasmere ones.
And am I right in saying, Jeff, that we could use some of the images, for example, of these pictures and put them into this Ullswater Heritage Knowledge Bank, which would be immediately accessible to anyone who was wanting to visit the area, or even locals or schools and so on, so they could see online all these wonderful pictures. It would be a wonderful thing to have here, I think. So
yeah, thanks, Pam. I see that. That's exactly it. The other thing is that if you go to our website, which is well, I'll put it on here as well. Our collections are all searchable. And if you look at the fine art search and you put in Ullswater, you'll see a lot of what you saw tonight, but you'll also see a lot of the prints. We've tended just to digitize the watercolors and the paintings, but the prints are there as well as a reference. So if you want an image of a print, just email me and I'll send you back send you back an image. So I say, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the trust will. I won't. We'll make sure you get one.
I think we should thank you again, Jeff. I'll just close the meeting in a minute, just by saying a couple of things about future talks. Miles McInnes, who's on this audience, is a former chair of the Friends of the Ullswater Way. He's and also the chair of the Ullswater Preservation Society. He's giving a talk actually on Saturday to the Ullswater Breakfast Group on 10 o'clock on Saturday on Lord Burkitt and the saving of the Ullswater. So if people are interested in that, maybe they could contact me and I can see whether we can send them a Zoom link for that. I'd also like to just advertise two subsequent talks which are taking place next. So the first Thursday of every month, we have our regular talks. The next one is on the 4th of March. It's the challenges of managing common land in Ullswater by Dr. Julia Agenby, who's the professor in practice at University of Cumbria and the executive director of the Foundation for Common Land. As you know, Ullswater is surrounded by a lot of common land. It's a very topical issue. And then a month later, on the 8th of April, we have the great honor of having John Rogers, the president of the Cumberland Geological Society, who's going to talk about the geology and landscape of the Ullswater Valley. Wow. So I think that again will be a fascinating talk for all of us. So just a final word to thank you again, Jeff, for keeping us completely on edge all the way through. Magical discussion, just so brilliantly illustrated, and such a privilege for us to see you handling these unique poems and literature and so on from water. So from myself and others here, a huge thank you for all you've done tonight. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks to the technology and my wife Anne for keeping it together. I'm glad the Zoom call stood up to this test.
Tim?
All the very best.
If I told you, Tim, at 4:30 this afternoon,
I was going to say something. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, can I just thank everybody who's made a donation? And it's to say the donations that we receive today, we're going to gather them all together in 2 weeks' time. I should be able to distribute half of them to the Wordsworth Trust.
Thank you.
That's our policy is 50-50. So
thank
you very much for everyone who's donated and everyone who's going to.
Thank you. Dig deep. Thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you.
All the very best and good night. Keep well.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.